Hi guys, welcome back. Leo McCarthy here, spiritual mentor, Reiki Master, EFT Tapping practitioner, and Shaman. Today I want to talk about a feeling that either you've had before or you're currently feeling right now, but it is I feel lost. Now, why do we feel lost? A lot of this feeling comes from issues with our identity. Now, if we can think back to when we were younger, when let's say we were kids, we had a routine, maybe a structure with our lives where we got up, we went to school, and then maybe afterwards we played a sport. Maybe we didn't, maybe we played an instrument. Um, and we had maybe some friends, or maybe we felt like we didn't have any friends. But back then, our identity was basically what our life was as far as what our day to day looked like, as far as being a student, going to school, maybe being an athlete, maybe being social in a circle of friends, or if you felt like you didn't have friends, maybe you felt like an outcast, maybe you felt like you didn't fit in. All of these things are what made up your identity back then. And then as we grow and we get a little bit older and get more life experience, maybe beyond, let's say, whether you graduated high school or you didn't, maybe you didn't finish school and maybe life has been really hard since then and you've been struggling with, whether to get your GED or not. And you're struggling to make ends meet. Or maybe you did graduate and maybe you went to college or maybe you didn't go to college. Maybe you went to a vocational school to learn a trade, or maybe you didn't do either of those things. And maybe you just kind of went out and found a job because you needed to make money to pay bills and you didn't really have the funds to support yourself with continuing your education. And there's a shift with our identity going from earlier in our life when we were in school, maybe going through junior high, high school, etc., and maybe being an athlete or a musician. We had those identities with us that is who we were back then. And after we got out of school, whether we finished school or we graduated, maybe we didn't continue that instrument beyond school. Maybe we didn't continue playing that sport. And so now we kind of lost a little bit of that identity once we got out of school. And maybe that's kind of one of our first experiences with maybe losing a piece of our identity, with not being a musician anymore because you're not playing the instrument anymore. Maybe you're not the athlete that you were in school because it wasn't available to you afterwards. Um, and so those are some of the experiences that we go through life where there's a shift with our identity, and probably the first time or one of the times that we struggle with who we are and what are we doing, where are we going, and what's happening with our life. And as we go beyond that, we may have healthy relationships, we may have unhealthy relationships. And in those relationships, depending on your personality type, we either continue to kind of be who we are and who we feel we are, or sometimes we may even adapt to be something that we think the other person expects us to be in a relationship. And so there's another situation where our identity is changing and shifting beyond what it was. And so with these changes that have happened up so far, our identity has changed possibly a few times. And so maybe currently now, maybe you're out of that unhealthy relationship and you're going through life. Maybe you're working a job, and maybe you didn't finish high school earlier, but you decided maybe you wanted to go back to school or you wanted to work on getting your GED. So now your life is, maybe you're out of an unhealthy relationship, you're working maybe 1 to 2 jobs to make ends meet, and maybe you're working on your GED, or maybe you did finish school and but maybe you didn't go to college afterwards, and maybe you didn't go to a trade school, but you decided maybe to expand your skill set, for what you can do out in the world. You decided you wanted to get maybe some new training or some new education to expand on your skills and expand on your resume, to maybe look to being able to be employed doing something different than you're doing now, that maybe you're passionate about or you're into or you're curious about. Or maybe you're taking courses to help build maybe your self-esteem, building your character, building your skill set to be, maybe you don't feel drawn to work for someone else, and maybe you feel like you want to do something yourself. Maybe you want to be self-employed, maybe you want to be an entrepreneur. And you're currently like working on growing yourself and what you can offer, and whether or not that is like getting into selling products or selling a service that you maybe provide. Again, as we're going through this transition, we are again shifting our identity of who we are again. As you know, maybe back in high school, we were this football player or we were this cheerleader, and years have passed and that stuff behind us in our past. But now maybe we're working maybe 1 to 2 jobs and we're employed, and maybe we're now a student in college, or maybe we're taking a course, to become maybe a massage therapist or a hairdresser or something like that. So now our identity is as a student as well, in addition to everything else. And let's go beyond that. And maybe that stuff's in our past now. And maybe currently your situation is you're done with all of that. And maybe you are self-employed. Maybe you are an entrepreneur, and maybe you are your own boss. And so the responsibility falls solely on you to succeed. And now we're, remembering these old past identities and situations, but currently we're kind of getting to know our current self in our current situation. And we're working on kind of reframing now our current identity of who we are. And we may not have that in a concrete way, that we know who we are. And maybe we're not sure how to get there. And so there are ways in figuring this out, through, it could be meditation, it could be talk therapy, it could be exploring modalities like EFT tapping or shamanic work, hypnotherapy, because in order to explore and open up maybe what our new identity is we need to kind of move past some of the blockages and some of the old perceptions and some of the fears that keep us mentally limited in our current belief system. And so sometimes we can't get to know our true authentic self as we are now yet because we're still trying to figure out kind of what created the version that we are now and how we got here. And so maybe why you're feeling lost right now also is because maybe you've gone through either a dark night of the soul, maybe once or twice, and or you're having a spiritual awakening, and how you see the world now is much different than how you saw it previously. And that also affects our identity because the version of ourselves that saw the previous world was one thing, but now you see our world as something different. So now we're trying to figure out how do we fit in this new perceived world, and what is our new identity that allows us to kind of move into this space and this perception of what our new reality is. And so there's a lot of inner work to be done to find out about our true authentic selves and get to know them. And you need to kind of explore these things, these limiting beliefs, these blockages that hold us back and limit us from being able to think that we have control of to make different choices, to go beyond the current version of ourselves, to move into a version of ourselves that now can move through this new reality. And we can't do that unless we're ready to heal. And so if you haven't watched it yet, I recorded a previous video about are we ready to heal or am I ready to heal? And take a minute after this video and go back and watch that one, because unless we're ready to do the inner work, unless we're ready to heal, we may not be able to create that new version of ourselves that needs to exist for our current reality. And we may not be able to get to know our true authentic selves unless we're able to move past the previous limiting beliefs and the stuck emotions that are blocking us from healing and going beyond maybe our current comfort zone that we know. So I wanted to give you some food for thought about maybe what is behind maybe feeling lost, and what has over the years affected our identity, and how does our identity to connect to feeling lost. So thank you for just taking the time to listen to this, and take some time and actually rewatch this. And it may take a few times for some of this stuff to sink in and to process. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk soon.